I never thought I would end up in federal prison over a piece of solar panel installation. But here I am, explaining to my lawyer how a dispute with my homeowner association escalated into what the prosecutor called domestic terrorism. Let me back up and tell you how this absolute nightmare started. My name is William Irving, and I bought my dream house in Scottsdale, Arizona, 3 years ago. The place was perfect, a gorgeous 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a spacious backyard, mountain views, and enough room for my workshop. I'm an electrical engineer by trade, which becomes important later. The neighborhood, Saguaro Heights, seemed like paradise when I moved in. Clean streets, well-maintained common areas, and friendly neighbors who actually waved when you drove past. What I didn't realize was that beneath this suburban perfection lurked a homeowner association run by a woman who would make my life a living hell. Her name was Patricia Miller, and she was the HOA president. Patricia was 52 years old with that particular haircut, you know the one, short and blonde with aggressive highlights, the kind that seems to defy both gravity and good sense. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a custom license plate that read Rolls-Rock and had a voice that could strip paint off walls when she got going. I met her exactly 1 week after moving in when she knocked on my door at 7 in the morning on a Saturday. "Good morning," I said groggily, still in my pajamas with a cup of coffee in hand. "Can I help you?" "Patricia Miller, HOA president," she announced, thrusting a clipboard at me. "I'm conducting my monthly property inspections, and I need to inform you that your trash bins are visible from the street. Section 4.7 of the HOA covenant states that all trash receptacles must be stored out of sight except on collection days." I blinked at her, trying to process this ambush. "It's Saturday morning. Trash collection is Monday. I was going to move them tomorrow night. The covenant doesn't specify when they need to be placed out, only that they cannot be visible otherwise," she said, her lips pursing into a thin line. "I'm issuing you a warning this time, but subsequent violations will result in fines of $50 per day." I should have seen the warning signs right there, but I was tired and just wanted to get back to my coffee. "Sure, no problem. I'll move them now." "See that you do," she said, making a note on her clipboard before marching back to her Lexus like she had just saved Western civilization. Over the next few months, Patricia found approximately 17 different reasons to fine me or send me violation notices. My grass was a 1/4 inch too long. My mailbox had a small rust spot. My car was parked in my own driveway facing the wrong direction. Apparently, there was some obscure rule about vehicles needing to face the house. I paid the fines because it seemed easier than fighting, even though each one felt like a small knife wound to my bank account. By month 6, I had paid nearly $800 in various penalties for violations I never even knew existed. Then came the solar panel issue that changed everything. Arizona gets about 300 days of sunshine per year, and my electric bills were astronomical, running the air conditioning through the brutal summers. I did the math and realized that installing solar panels would pay for themselves within 5 years, and after that, I would essentially have free electricity. I'm an electrical engineer. This was my wheelhouse. I filed all the proper permits with the city, hired a licensed contractor, and started the installation in early March. The panels went up beautifully. 36 high-efficiency panels covering the south-facing portion of my roof, connected to a battery storage system I installed in my garage. The system was gorgeous, completely professional, and perfectly legal. Arizona state law actually prohibits HOAs from preventing solar panel installation due to environmental policy. I had done my homework. Patricia showed up the day after installation, and I could hear her screeching before I even opened the door. "What is that monstrosity on your roof?" she demanded, pointing upward like she had spotted an alien spacecraft. "Solar panels," I said calmly. "All properly permitted and installed to code. You did not get HOA approval for this alteration to your property," she snapped, her face turning an impressive shade of crimson. Section 8.2 clearly states that any exterior modifications require board approval before installation. Arizona state law prohibits HOAs from blocking solar panel installation, I replied, pulling out my phone to show her the statute. "I don't need your approval. This is protected by state law." Her eyes narrowed into slits. "We'll see about that. You've made a very big mistake, Mr. Irving." 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney demanding I remove the solar panels within 30 days or face daily fines of $500. I responded with my own letter from a lawyer I had consulted, citing the relevant Arizona statutes that protected my installation. The HOA board held an emergency meeting where they voted to fine me anyway. State law be damned. That's when things got truly insane. I woke up on a Tuesday morning in late April to discover I had no power. Not just no power, my solar panels weren't working either, which made no sense because the sun was blazing overhead. I went outside to investigate and felt my stomach drop. Someone had cut my power lines, not the main feed from the utility that would be too obvious. They had cut the lines running from my solar panels to my battery system and the lines connecting my house to the grid at the junction box on the side of my property. The cuts were clean, done with professional equipment, and clearly deliberate. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. I immediately called the police and my utility company. The utility company sent someone out within 2 hours who looked at the damage and whistled low. "Someone really wanted to mess with you," the technician said, a guy named Robert who looked genuinely disturbed. "This is going to take a few days to fix properly, and your solar system probably needs recertification after someone tampered with it." "Who did you make angry?" "My HOA president," I said, feeling rage building in my chest like a physical pressure. "Ah," Robert said knowingly. "We see that more than you'd think. File a police report. This is criminal destruction of property." The police came, took photos, filed a report, and basically told me that without evidence pointing to a specific person, there was not much they could do. I knew it was Patricia or someone she had hired, but I couldn't prove it. The security cameras I had installed only covered my front door and backyard, not the side of the house where the junction box was located. It took 3 days and $2,000 to get everything fixed and recertified. I was out of power in Arizona heat that climbed to 105 degrees. I had to stay in a hotel for 2 nights because my house became uninhabitable. I was beyond furious. I was coldly, calculatingly angry in a way I had never experienced before. I started documenting everything. Every interaction with Patricia, every fine, every violation notice, every piece of correspondence. I filed a civil suit against the HOA for harassment and for the destruction of my property. My lawyer was optimistic about our chances, but he warned me that litigation could take years, and that even if we won, collecting damages from an HOA could be complicated. Meanwhile, Patricia was not done with me. She started issuing violation notices for increasingly absurd things. My porch light was too bright. My doormat was not an approved color. The bird feeder in my backyard was attracting nuisance wildlife and violated some pest control provision. Each violation came with its own fine, and when I refused to pay, the HOA placed a lien on my property. That's when I discovered the truly terrifying power HOAs have in Arizona. They can literally foreclose on your home for unpaid fines and fees. I had paid $180,000 for my house, and they were threatening to take it over $4,000 in disputed fines for violations that were either completely made up or impossibly petty. I tried reasoning with the board. I attended HOA meetings and presented my case calmly and professionally, citing state laws and showing evidence that Patricia was targeting me specifically. The board consisted of 5 members. Patricia as president, a retired accountant named Donald who seemed to be Patricia's lapdog, 2 middle-aged women named Susan and Karen who just nodded at everything Patricia said, and 1 reasonable person named Michael Chen who was outvoted on everything. Michael actually approached me after one meeting in late May. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I've tried to vote against these ridiculous fines, but I'm only 1 vote. Patricia has it out for you, and honestly, I think she's on some kind of power trip. Have you considered just moving?" "Why should I move?" I asked, hearing the bitterness in my own voice. "I own this house. I've done nothing wrong. I'm not going to let some wannabe dictator drive me out of my own home." Michael nodded sympathetically. "I get it. Just be careful. Patricia has connections with people on the city council, and she plays dirty. Watch your back." I should have listened to him more carefully. On June 15th, I came home from work to find my power was out again. This time, they had not just cut lines, they had physically removed my electrical meter. The seal was broken, the meter was gone, and the connection box was left open to the elements. This was not just vandalism, this was dangerous and completely illegal. Only utility workers are supposed to handle meters, and doing this without authorization was a serious crime. I called the utility company immediately, and they sounded as shocked as I felt. "Sir, we didn't authorize anyone to remove your meter. If someone took it, that's theft of utility property and tampering with infrastructure. You need to call the police right now." I did. This time, a detective came out, a woman named Sarah Rodriguez who seemed genuinely interested in the case. She took extensive photos, interviewed me about the ongoing situation with Patricia and the HOA, and promised to investigate thoroughly. "Mr. Irving," she said before leaving, "I'm going to be honest with you. Even if we can prove the HOA president was involved, getting charges filed for something like this can be tricky. But we're going to try. In the meantime, document everything and consider getting security cameras that cover your entire property." "I'm doing that today," I assured her. The utility company had to send a crew out to replace the meter and inspect all the connections to make sure nothing had been damaged. Another $600 out of my pocket. My insurance company was fighting me on covering any of this, claiming it was related to a dispute rather than random vandalism. I was bleeding money and running out of patience. I installed 8 security cameras covering every angle of my property. Front door, back door, both sides of the house, the junction box, the driveway, and 2 covering the street approach. High definition, night vision, motion detection, cloud backup. If someone so much as sneezed near my property, I would have it on video. The cameras caught something interesting 3 nights later. At 2:30 in the morning, a white van pulled up to the house next door to mine, a house that had been empty for 2 months, while the owners were dealing with some family emergency back east. 2 men got out, and while I couldn't make out their faces clearly in the darkness, I could see them walking around the property and taking photos. They spent about 20 minutes circling my house from the neighboring yard, pointing and discussing something. I downloaded the footage and sent it to Detective Rodriguez. She called me back the next day. That van is registered to a company called Peak Property Services, she said. Guess who owns Peak Property Services? Patricia's husband, close, her brother. They do HOA enforcement work, basically hired muscle to intimidate homeowners. We've had complaints about them before, but nothing we could make stick. This footage helps, but they're not actually on your property, so we can't charge them with trespassing. So what can you do? Keep documenting. We're building a case for harassment and stalking, but these things take time. Just keep your head down and stay safe. Keep my head down. As if that was possible at this point. The next HOA meeting was in late June, and I attended with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Jennifer Martinez who specialized in property disputes. Patricia's face went pale when Jennifer walked in with me. "This is a closed meeting for homeowners only," Patricia announced, pointing at Jennifer. "Arizona law allows homeowners to bring legal representation to HOA meetings," Jennifer replied smoothly, pulling out her tablet. "Section 33-1804 of Arizona statutes. Would you like me to read it aloud?" Patricia's jaw clenched, but she nodded curtly. "Fine. What's on your agenda, Mr. Irving?" "I'm here to formally protest the fines levied against me, and to present evidence that you and this board have been targeting me specifically for harassment," I said, standing up. "I have documentation of 23 separate fines issued to me in 8 months, compared to an average of 2 fines per year for other homeowners in this community. I have evidence that my power has been tampered with twice, and I have reason to believe the HOA president is involved." "That's slander," Patricia shouted, her face turning that familiar crimson shade. "How dare you accuse me? I'm not accusing you of anything specific," I interrupted calmly. "I'm presenting facts. My lawyer has prepared a cease and desist letter regarding further harassment, and we're filing a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA conduct. Additionally, we're expanding our civil suit to include damages for the power tampering incidents." Jennifer stepped forward and placed a thick envelope on the table in front of Patricia. "This contains copies of all documentation, witness statements from neighbors who confirm the disparate treatment, and analysis of HOA fine patterns showing clear targeting. We're also requesting a forensic audit of HOA finances to ensure that collected fines are being properly allocated." The room went silent. Susan and Karen looked uncomfortable. Donald was staring at the table. Michael was trying not to smile. Patricia looked like she wanted to leap across the table and strangle me. "This meeting is adjourned," Patricia announced abruptly, standing up and grabbing her purse. "We still have regular business to cover," Michael objected. "You can't just—" "I said adjourned." Patricia screamed, storming out of the community center where meetings were held. Jennifer and I left feeling like we had scored a victory, but that feeling didn't last long. 2 nights later, at exactly 3:17 in the morning, my cameras caught a figure approaching my property. Dark clothing, face covered with a balaclava, carrying what looked like bolt cutters. The figure went straight to my junction box and started cutting. I was already awake. I had been sleeping lightly ever since the second power incident, and I grabbed my phone to call the police while watching the live feed. But here's what I also did, and this is where my engineer brain went into overdrive. I had installed a secondary system after the first tampering incident. My solar panels fed into a battery system that was completely isolated from the grid, with its own hidden connection points. When the main power went down, the house automatically switched to battery backup. The intruder didn't know that. He finished cutting, probably expecting the house to go dark, but my lights stayed on. I could see the confusion in his body language. He stood there for a moment, looking at the house, then at the junction box, clearly puzzled. That's when I turned on the exterior floodlights, all of them, simultaneously, with the brightness of a small stadium. The figure jumped, startled, and ran for a truck parked down the street. My cameras caught the license plate perfectly. The police arrived within 10 minutes. I showed them the footage, and Detective Rodriguez looked grimly satisfied. "We've got him. That plate comes back to a 2018 Ford F-150 registered to Thomas Miller." "Let me guess," I said. "Patricia's husband, her son, actually. 26 years old, lives with mommy, has a record for petty theft and vandalism. We can pick him up within the hour." They arrested Thomas Miller at 6 that morning. He was charged with criminal trespassing, vandalism, destruction of property, and tampering with utilities. Patricia tried to pay his bail immediately, but the judge, apparently tired of similar cases involving HOA disputes, set it at $20,000 and imposed travel restrictions. I thought this would be the end of it. Thomas was caught red-handed on camera. The case was solid. Patricia would have to back off or risk her son going to jail. I was wrong about how far a mother's protective instinct could overcome basic common sense. The HOA held an emergency meeting without notifying me, which was illegal, by the way, and voted to levy a special assessment of $15,000 on my property alone, for legal fees associated with defending the board against frivolous litigation. Jennifer immediately filed for an injunction, but that would take weeks to process through the court system. Meanwhile, Patricia started spreading rumors through the neighborhood that I was a dangerous criminal, that I had threatened her family, that I was unstable and violent. I started getting cold shoulders from neighbors who had been friendly before. Someone spray-painted "Psycho" on my driveway. My mailbox was knocked over twice in 1 week. The stress was destroying me. I was barely sleeping, constantly checking my security cameras, jumping at every sound. My work was suffering. My boss called me in for a conversation about my declining performance and told me I needed to take some time off to deal with my personal issues. I couldn't afford to take time off. I needed every cent to pay for lawyers and repairs and hotel stays when my power got cut. It was July now, and Arizona summer was in full, brutal force. Temperatures hit 115 degrees. My air conditioning was essential for survival, not comfort, and that's when Patricia made her biggest mistake. On July 23rd, I woke up at 6 in the morning to a house that was already 85 degrees inside. No power again. But this time, my battery backup was also dead, completely drained, which made no sense because it had been fully charged the night before. I went outside to check and found something that made my blood run cold. They hadn't just cut my power lines this time. Someone had physically destroyed my solar panel system. Panels were shattered, wiring was ripped out, the inverter was smashed with what looked like a sledgehammer. Months of work and $20,000 in equipment destroyed. My battery system had been drained by cutting into it and short-circuiting the cells, dangerous work that could have caused an explosion. This was it. This was the moment something inside me snapped. I called the police. I called my lawyer. I documented everything with photos and videos. Detective Rodriguez came out personally, took one look at the damage, and said simply, "This is felony destruction of property. Easily $20,000 in damages. We're going to get whoever did this." But I knew who did it. Patricia had declared war, and she was willing to destroy my property, my finances, and my peace of mind to win. The legal system was too slow. Even with evidence, even with arrests, she kept coming. And I realized something sitting there in my sweltering house with no power and no way to fix it quickly. Patricia had one crucial vulnerability. She lived in this neighborhood. So did all her board members. So did all the people who enabled her reign of terror by staying silent and paying their dues and pretending not to see what she was doing to anyone who challenged her authority. And this entire neighborhood was powered by a single electrical substation. I'm an electrical engineer. I know substations. I had actually done consulting work on grid infrastructure for Arizona Public Service early in my career. I knew exactly where the substation for Saguaro Heights was located, what kind of equipment it used, and most importantly, how vulnerable it was. Let me be clear, what I was thinking was illegal. Wildly, incredibly illegal. I knew that. But I was past caring. Patricia had destroyed my property 4 times now. Her son was out on bail and facing minimal consequences. The legal system was moving at a glacial pace. My lawyer kept telling me to be patient, that we would win eventually. But eventually, I would be bankrupt or foreclosed on or driven completely insane. So I started planning. The substation was located about a quarter-mile from the neighborhood, surrounded by a chain-link fence with warning signs about high voltage. It was automated, monitored remotely, but rarely visited in person except for scheduled maintenance. The main components were transformers that stepped down high-voltage power from transmission lines to the 120/240-volt residential service, circuit breakers, and switchgear. I spent 3 days doing reconnaissance, driving by at different times, noting security camera positions, checking for patterns in utility company visits. I mapped out approach routes that avoided camera coverage. I researched what tools I would need and what actions would cause the maximum disruption without creating a dangerous situation that could hurt people. Here's the thing about substations. They're designed with redundancy and safety systems. If you damage them correctly, they shut down safely rather than catastrophically. I didn't want to hurt anyone or start fires or cause actual danger. I just wanted Patricia and everyone in Saguaro Heights to experience what I had been experiencing, the feeling of being powerless, vulnerable, and at someone else's mercy. On July 30th, at 2 in the morning, I drove to a parking lot about a half-mile from the substation. I was dressed in dark clothing, wearing gloves, and carrying a backpack with tools, heavy-duty bolt cutters for the fence, an insulated pry bar, and a few other specialized items. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, and some rational part of my brain was screaming that this was insane. But I did it anyway. I approached from the south side where there were no cameras, cut through the fence with the bolt cutters, and slipped inside. The substation hummed with that distinctive electrical buzz, transformers radiating heat into the night air. I went to the main circuit breaker panel, a large metal box controlling the feeds to different sections of the grid. Using the insulated pry bar, I forced open the panel. Inside were rows of breakers, each labeled with the section of the grid it controlled. I found the ones labeled for Saguaro Heights and used a wrench to physically remove the breaker mechanisms. Not just flip them off, I removed the entire breaker units so they couldn't be easily reset. Then I took those breakers and threw them over the fence into the desert brush where they would be hard to find in the dark. But I wasn't done. I went to the transformer section and used the pry bar to damage the cooling fins and the external connections. Nothing that would make the transformers explode. I'm not a monster, but enough that they would need significant repair work before they could safely operate again. The whole operation took about 20 minutes. When I was finished, I slipped back through the fence, hiked back to my car, and drove home, taking a deliberately roundabout route in case anyone had seen me or reported a suspicious vehicle. I got home at 3:30 in the morning, stripped off my clothes, showered, and burned the clothing in my outdoor fire pit. I smashed the tools into pieces and distributed them in 3 different dumpsters across Scottsdale over the next day. Then I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. The power went out across Sagaro Heights at approximately 4:45 in the morning when the damaged equipment finally triggered automatic shutdowns. Every house, every street light, every traffic signal in the development went dark. And unlike when Patricia cut my power, this couldn't be fixed in a few hours. I woke up at 7 to the sound of sirens and helicopters. Looking out my window, I could see neighbors standing in their driveways looking confused and angry. The temperature was already climbing toward 100 degrees. Without air conditioning, these houses would become uninhabitable by noon. My phone started ringing. It was Jennifer, my lawyer. "William, what's happening? The power is out across your entire neighborhood. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, trying to sound surprised. "I just woke up to it. Do you know what happened?" "The news is reporting some kind of equipment failure at the local substation. They're saying it could take days to fix." "This is actually good for our case. It shows that utility infrastructure problems happen, which supports your claims about your power issues being suspicious." "That's good," I said, feeling a strange mix of guilt and satisfaction. The satisfaction didn't last long. By noon, the temperature inside houses was hitting 100 degrees. Elderly residents were being evacuated to cooling centers. Food was spoiling in refrigerators. People who worked from home couldn't do their jobs. The local news was covering it as a major story, interviewing angry residents and utility company representatives who kept saying they were working as fast as they could. Patricia was one of the people interviewed. She stood in front of her house, sweating profusely, makeup running, and complained loudly about the incompetence of the utility company. "This is unacceptable. We pay our bills on time, we maintain our neighborhood, and this is how we're treated. Someone needs to be held accountable." I watched the interview on my phone and felt a wave of something I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't quite guilt, but it wasn't satisfaction either, more like a hollow numbness. The power stayed out for 3 days. The utility company had to bring in specialized equipment and crews from Phoenix to repair the damage. They were baffled by what had happened, according to news reports. The equipment had been vandalized, but in a way that showed technical knowledge. Breakers were missing. Transformer connections were damaged. It wasn't random destruction, it was calculated sabotage. On day 2, the FBI got involved. Attacks on electrical infrastructure are federal crimes, classified as potential terrorism because of the risk to public safety. I watched FBI agents in their windbreakers walking through the neighborhood, interviewing residents, asking if anyone had seen anything suspicious. That's when the reality of what I had done really hit me. I had committed a federal crime. Not just vandalism or trespassing, I had attacked critical infrastructure. If they caught me, I was looking at decades in prison. My revenge against Patricia had turned me into exactly what she had been calling me, a criminal. I thought about turning myself in. I really did. But I was paralyzed by fear and by the question of what would happen if I did. Would they believe that I had been driven to it by months of harassment? Would they care? Or would I just be another crazy person who destroyed property because he was angry? The power came back on after 3 days. By that time, residents of Sagaro Heights had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars collectively for hotels, ruined food, backup generators, and other emergency measures. The utility company announced they were launching a full investigation and had increased security at all substations in the region. I thought maybe, somehow, I had gotten away with it. I had been careful. I had destroyed all the evidence. There were no cameras in the direction I had approached from. I had been wearing gloves the entire time. There was no physical evidence connecting me to the crime, but I hadn't counted on Detective Rodriguez being as thorough as she was. She showed up at my door on August 5th with 2 FBI agents. My stomach dropped the moment I saw them. "Mr. Irving, we need to talk to you about the Substation incident," Detective Rodriguez said. Her face was professionally neutral, but I could see disappointment in her eyes. "I don't know anything about that," I said, which was possibly the stupidest lie I could have told. One of the FBI agents, a tall man with graying hair, held up a tablet. "Mr. Irving, we pulled cell phone tower data for the area around the substation on the night of July 30th. Your phone pinged a tower near that location at approximately 2:15 a.m. Can you explain why you were in that area at that time?" My mind raced. I hadn't thought about cell phone tracking. I hadn't even considered it. I couldn't sleep. I went for a drive. "A drive that took you within a quarter-mile of a substation that was vandalized that same night," the other FBI agent, a woman with sharp eyes, said. "That's quite a coincidence. It's a public road. I'm allowed to drive wherever I want." "We also found something interesting," Detective Rodriguez said quietly. "When we analyzed the damage to the substation, the techniques used were consistent with someone who had electrical engineering knowledge. The breakers were removed in a specific sequence that prevented cascading failures. The transformer damage was precise enough to disable the equipment without causing dangerous conditions. This wasn't random vandalism, it was done by someone who understood exactly what they were doing. And you're one of maybe 50 people in Scottsdale with both the knowledge to do this and a motive," the male FBI agent added. "You've been the victim of repeated property damage related to a dispute with your HOA. The HOA president lives in the neighborhood that lost power." "That's not a coincidence." I knew I should ask for a lawyer. I knew I should stop talking immediately. But some part of me was tired of lying, tired of fighting, tired of all of it. "I want to speak to my lawyer," I said. "That's your right," the female FBI agent said. "But I'm going to tell you right now that we're going to search your property. We're going to analyze every piece of evidence we have, and we're going to build a case. If you cooperate now, it will go better for you than if you make us do this the hard way." They arrested me that afternoon. They searched my house and found my planning documents on my computer. I had thought I deleted them, but digital forensics recovered everything. They found receipts from the hardware store where I bought the bolt cutters, even though I had paid cash. Security cameras had captured me making the purchase. They found clothing fibers in my car that matched samples from the substation location. I had thought I was careful, but I was an amateur playing at being a criminal, and professionals knew exactly how to catch amateurs. Jennifer visited me in jail that evening. She looked exhausted and disappointed. "William, what were you thinking? We were going to win this case. We had evidence, we had precedent. We had everything we needed to destroy Patricia and the HOA in court, and you threw it all away to commit a federal crime." "She destroyed my property 4 times, I said. "She was ruining my life. The courts were too slow. So instead of waiting for justice, you decided to become a terrorist." Jennifer's voice was sharp. "Because that's what they are charging you with, William. Destruction of critical infrastructure with intent to intimidate or coerce. That's domestic terrorism under federal law. You're looking at 20 years minimum." The reality of that statement hit me like a physical blow. 20 years. I was 38 years old. I would be nearly 60 when I got out if I got out that early. My life was over. "Can you help me?" I asked quietly. "I can try," Jennifer said. "But you need to understand how bad this is. You didn't just vandalize property. You cut power to 300 homes for 3 days in 115-degree heat. Elderly people were hospitalized, an estimated $600,000 in damages and economic impact. Even with the mitigating circumstances of the harassment you suffered, no judge is going to look kindly on this. The legal process ground forward with terrible inevitability. The FBI investigation concluded that I had acted alone, which was good. At least I hadn't dragged anyone else into this disaster. They confirmed that my intent had been revenge against the HOA rather than any broader political or ideological motivation, which slightly reduced the terrorism charges to simple destruction of infrastructure. Patricia, of course, was all over the news playing the victim. She gave teary-eyed interviews about how terrified she had been, how she had feared for her family's safety, how this proved that I had been dangerous all along, and the HOA had been right to try to protect the neighborhood from me. The irony of her saying this while her son was awaiting trial for vandalizing my property was apparently lost on her. My case went to trial in November. Jennifer argued that I had been driven to a breaking point by systematic harassment and repeated destruction of my property. She presented all the evidence of Patricia's targeting, the HOA's violations of state law, the damage to my solar panels and power systems, everything. She argued for leniency based on extreme emotional distress. The prosecution argued that nothing justified attacking critical infrastructure that served innocent people who had nothing to do with my dispute. They paraded witnesses who talked about the terror of being without power, the elderly woman who had a medical emergency due to heat exposure, the families who lost thousands of dollars in food and temporary housing costs. I testified in my own defense, which Jennifer advised against, but I insisted on. I tried to explain the months of feeling helpless and victimized, of watching the legal system move too slowly while Patricia destroyed my life piece by piece. I admitted what I did was wrong, but tried to make the jury understand why I had felt like I had no other choice. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found me guilty of destruction of critical infrastructure and criminal mischief, but rejected the enhanced terrorism charges. It was a small mercy. The judge sentenced me to 8 years in federal prison, with credit for time served and possibility of parole after 5 years. Additionally, I was ordered to pay $250,000 in restitution to the utility company and affected residents. I'm currently serving that sentence at FCI Phoenix, a low-security federal facility. My house has been foreclosed on. I couldn't pay the mortgage from prison, and the HOA liens were satisfied first. Patricia got exactly what she wanted in the end. I lost everything. But here's the thing. So did she, eventually. The publicity around my case drew attention to HOA abuses across Arizona. Reporters started investigating Patricia and the Saguaro Heights HOA. They found evidence of financial mismanagement. Patricia had been paying her brother's company inflated fees for enforcement services, funded by HOA dues. They found evidence that she had used HOA funds to pay for her son's legal defense. They found a pattern of targeting homeowners who challenged her authority, not just me. The Arizona Attorney General opened an investigation into the HOA. Patricia was charged with embezzlement and fraud. Her son Thomas pled guilty to vandalism charges related to my property and got 2 years probation. Patricia's case went to trial, and she was convicted on multiple counts. Last I heard, she was sentenced to 4 years in state prison for stealing approximately $90,000 from the HOA over 3 years, so we both ended up in prison in the end. The HOA was dissolved by court order, and the neighborhood is now managed by a professional management company with actual oversight. The homeowners in Sagaro Heights learned an expensive lesson about the dangers of giving petty tyrants unlimited authority over their lives and property. As for me, I sit in here and think about what I could have done differently. I think about how close I was to winning through legal means, and how I threw it all away in one night of rage-fueled revenge. I think about the elderly woman who ended up in the hospital because I cut power during a heat wave. I think about the families who suffered because I wanted Patricia to feel what I had felt. I was right that Patricia was a nightmare who abused her power and victimized people. I was right that the HOA system is broken and gives too much authority to people like her. I was right that the legal system was too slow to protect me from ongoing harassment. But being right about those things didn't justify what I did. Two wrongs don't make a right, as my mother used to say. I became the villain in my own story, and I destroyed my life more completely than Patricia ever could have on her own. Michael Chen, the one reasonable board member, wrote to me after I was sentenced. He said he was sorry for not doing more to stop Patricia, that he had been a coward for not speaking up more forcefully. He said the neighborhood was healing now, that people were friendlier without Patricia's reign of terror hanging over everything. He said he hoped I could find some peace eventually. I wrote back thanking him and saying I hoped so too, but I'm not sure I believe it. I made choices that hurt innocent people because I was focused entirely on my own grievances. That's not something you easily come back from. Jennifer still visits occasionally, though there's not much she can do for me now. She's working on HOA reform legislation with some state representatives, trying to create better protections for homeowners and more oversight of HOA boards. She says my case became the catalyst for real change, which I suppose is something. But sitting here in a prison cell, waiting out 5 to 8 years of my life, I can tell you with absolute certainty, it wasn't worth it. The 30 minutes of satisfaction I felt when the power went out in Sagaro Heights cost me everything. My freedom, my home, my career, my reputation, my future. If I could go back and do it differently, I would have been patient. I would have trusted the legal system. I would have moved to a different neighborhood and left Patricia to her little kingdom of petness. I would have taken the financial hit and walked away rather than staying to fight a battle that consumed me. But I can't go back. All I can do is serve my time, pay my restitution, and try to rebuild some kind of life when I get out. And hope that sharing my story helps someone else who's dealing with an HOA nightmare understand that there are better ways to fight back than the one I chose. The lesson here isn't just about HOAs, though they really do need reform. The lesson is about what happens when we let anger and revenge override our better judgment. The lesson is about the importance of choosing legal, ethical paths, even when they're slower and more frustrating. The lesson is that becoming a monster to fight a monster just leaves the world with 2 monsters instead of 1. Patricia and I both learned that lesson the hard way. We're both sitting in prison cells right now, both of us having destroyed our own lives in a pointless battle over solar panels and suburban power dynamics. The homeowners of Sagaro Heights are moving on without either of us, probably happier for our absence. Sometimes there are no winners, only different kinds of losers. That's the truth about my HOA war. We all lost, and the only thing that came out of it was a cautionary tale about the dangers of escalation and revenge. I've got 3 more years minimum before I'm eligible for parole. I spend my days working in the prison library, taking online classes, and trying to be a model prisoner. I write letters to the people affected by the power outage, apologizing for the fear and inconvenience I caused them. Most don't write back, which I understand. My family visits when they can, though it's clear they are embarrassed by what I did. My parents are retired teachers who taught me to follow the rules and respect the law. They don't understand how I could have done something so reckless. I don't really understand it myself anymore. At night, I lie in my bunk and think about my house in Scottsdale with the mountain views and the solar panels that started all this trouble. I think about how proud I was of that installation, how it represented taking control of my energy independence and doing my part for the environment. I think about how something that started with good intentions spiraled into a nightmare that destroyed multiple lives. And I think about Patricia, sitting in her own cell somewhere in the Arizona state system, probably thinking about how a few solar panels and some petty fines spiraled into embezzlement charges and federal investigations. I wonder if she has any self-awareness about her role in creating this disaster, or if she still sees herself as the victim of my unreasonable resistance to her authority. The truth is somewhere in the middle, I suppose. She was a petty tyrant who abused her power and drove me to desperation. I was someone who had other options but chose revenge over patience. We're both guilty. We both paid for it. And the people of Saguaro Heights are hopefully learning to govern themselves better without either of us around to screw it up. That's my story. That's how an argument about solar panels ended with 2 people in prison and hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. That's how a homeowner association dispute escalated into federal crimes and destroyed lives. If you're reading this and you're in an HOA dispute, please learn from my mistakes. Fight through legal channels. Document everything. Be patient. Move if you have to, but don't do what I did. Don't let anger turn you into a criminal. Don't throw away your future for 30 minutes of revenge satisfaction. It's not worth it. Take it from someone who knows. It's never worth it.